Hey guys, it's Josie with Queen My Pawn. I'm going to show you a great game I just played. I feel amazing, like it's the game of the day, and I'd be remiss not to share it with you. So, it's actually my first time doing something different, and I'll show you what I mean in just a moment. E4, E5, Knight F3, Knight C6, Bishop E5, the Ruy Lopez. I'm actually pretty scared about this defense because I used to play it as a kid and I would win every time as white. But as black, I never really found out an effective way to defend against it that didn't involve so much memorizing. And turns out, rumor goes around that the Berlin defense, Knight of 6, leads to a playable position for black. And it makes sense because when you kick the bishop off this diagonal, you can always reroute there with a good gain of tempo, and black has some queenside space with b5 eventually, but it isn't something that favors me, and I don't know much more about it, but I know it involves a lot of memorizing, and I simply don't have time for that. And the position results in being like super close and super defensive for black, and I might not be too effective in time trouble, but if you have the time, you can definitely play a6. But here's an alternative: knight f6, and now they play d3. Okay. At this point, it's easy to see that bishop takes e6, d takes e6, knight takes e5 wins a pawn. So let me stop the threat by playing d6 myself. And if you play d4, it'd be what a waste of tempo. And I could just take the pawn and the knight takes back and then bishop d7 is fine. So he plays c3, allowing me again some more tempo. So bishop e7, h3, and now not castles right away, but h6 to prevent bishop g5. Also, castling, there's no need to rush into it. And if I play h6, I castle and I have some left for my king in case I need it. And that's really all there is to say about him. I'm not scared of him throwing his pawns at me because he'll probably castle kingside or remain unsafe in the middle. And I'll be fine. So he plays knight b2. Now the maneuver here is obvious, and it's been played many times where you go knight f1, knight g3, and some knight f5. Again, I wasn't too scared of this either, because if bishop takes f5, pawn takes f5, he does have 4 pawns here, but I have the center, so I should have an okay position. So I castle, knight f1. Now I play rook e8. And the idea is to play bishop f8, and I have a good position to work off. So knight g3, bishop f8, and now I can push in the center, but I want to play one more move before I do that, and we're going to see what it is in just a moment. So suppose I white castled. What would be a good move for black? Well, he did castle, and I didn't push d5, even though I may as well could have, but I wanted to keep developing with bishop e6. Now he played queen to e2. But what if d4? Threatening d5. It looks vicious, doesn't it? But I was planning on pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, and then d5. He would have to play e5, and I would have to play knight to e4. This at least wins the bishop. Or not necessarily, because I mean he has to move the knight, and I can at least block the pawn with playing pawn to bishop to d5, and the center is blocked for the time being, and that gives me some more time to readjust my pieces. And that pawn on e4 is really annoying. So notice that even if the knight moves away, I can't really take this because of bishop takes e8. And I knew that pin I was getting myself into, but I didn't really see too much trouble into it. Notice that also some ideas might come, like let's say the knight moves somewhere, like let's say knight to h2. Putting a queen out here on this outpost might look appealing, but after well, I may have to think about this, but I just know putting a queen to block a pawn is never a good idea, because the queen's the most powerful piece, and you're putting it to do something menial like blocking a pawn. Not sure if I could calculate it right away, but maybe bishop to a4 and bishop to b3. But again, the point is that the pin is still there. But putting a queen isn't a good idea, so I would put a bishop there. Anyways, the game continued like this. He played queen to e2, trying to protect the e pawn some more. But now find an interesting move for black. Did you find d5? That was actually the point of bishop e6 as well. And after pawn takes pawn, bishop takes pawn, black has an open center, which is exactly what he wants. So bishop takes e6, pawn takes e6, looks like it loses the e pawn, but not quite, because of the discovered attack with bishop takes h3. And now things start to get very interesting. Knight to c6. The queen's got to move, but it does so just as well. Then the knight goes to d4. If the pawn takes the bishop on h3, I can take the queen, the knight, and white's king is unsafe and prone to attack, whereas mine just looks fine. So you play knight to d4. How should black continue? Of course, it looks like the bishop is under attack and you should move it back. But how about the interesting move c5? Remember that if the bishop takes back, I can take the knight, and even though he does take me back there, I can always continue the captures, and looks like I may end up winning the d pawn, for example. Knight to f5, seemingly protecting the d pawn. Queen to d7. Pawn takes pawn, and now this is the point. Queen takes knight. So this is a strong move, c5. Black is claiming the center. And I saw two moves that the knight could attack the queen with, either knight to f5, which was played in the game, or knight to b5. If knight to b5, I was planning on queen to d7 anyways. So I take now, and knight takes back, but now queen to d7, trying to play into the previous tactic as before. The position of this queen is unfortunate, but it was necessary in order to keep protection on this pawn. The knight moves back. What's the best move for black? Now the best move is clearly c4. And you're attacking d3, and that's the base of the d3-e4 pawn chain. And attacking the base is basically how you bring a whole building down. It's just physics. So that's how this whole building is going to come down. There's no other way. I mean, strategically, I'm already better. So f3. Now, you could capture the pawns, and you'd have an open game, but you'd be a pawn down. It could be a draw. But what's better is keeping the attack going with bishop to d6. And he chose a suboptimal way to stop it with f4. Now, call me crazy, but I think this may actually just work. And if queen to c7 after king h2, it looks like I'm pinned. f4. But then I may just take here and then take there, and I'm winning a pawn either way. Kind of similar to the game, which we'll see in a moment. Anyways, I would never pay myself with king h2, but it was an interesting defense. I think the queen should move out the way, but you're losing a pawn, first of all. And in the center, and possibly the game if you do that. There's an interesting line, though, because queen takes f7, if everything opens up, could be possible. For example, pawn takes pawn, knight to f5, pawn takes pawn. But I don't think there's going to be enough time. I simply am better here. So, oh, but there's a tactic. Or is there? Bishop takes h6, and now what? You may say. It's definitely an interesting position. The knight can't move, and if the pawn takes, then the queen takes back, the queen takes back, the rook takes back, and could this pass pawn decide matters with rook to d8? It's very possible. It's very, very possible. So that's one of the ways that everything could have continued. But maybe it's a possible position. So in the game, he chose f4, but now I've come ahead winning the center with c takes d3, queen takes d3, d takes e4. And he's under attack now. And discover check with bishop to c5 is threatened. So now the tactics are coming alive. And the queen goes back to its unfortunate place on e2. I think queen to c2 was much better. And it's a way safer move, but this isn't safe at all. So e3. It's time. It's now or never to exploit the pin. After bishop takes e3, bishop to c5. Rook f3. Rook takes bishop. Rook takes rook. Knight to g4. And knight to f1. Rook to e8. So that should win the game. So rook to d1. Of course, I can't take the pawn, but let me revive matters with what move? Queen to c7. Now, I think he made a mistake, but what else is he going to do? He has nothing else to do. It's kind of a desperate move, but I don't really see the logic because I think what he was trying to get me to do was a couple of things because it's easy to go wrong in this position. What should black do now? Of course, black should stick to his guns with bishop to c5. If bishop takes f4, bishop takes bishop, and I think that white might just survive this game. Although I have to take the bishop. He moves back. But careful not to leave the knight hanging, so he actually moves here. And yeah, I think it's okay for white. I still prefer black though. But it looks kind of even, to be honest. So that's not a good way to go. Another interesting way would have been rook takes e3. Now, if queen takes e3, there was bishop to c5, but he has the block, and it is better for white because he'll be up a pawn after the exchange. Then there was bishop takes f4, seemingly winning a piece, although I'll still be down the, well, I won't be down the exchange, but I'll be up a rook and bishop for a knight. But I saw, right as I was going to play that, I saw a good move for whites. Queen to f3. If bishop takes, then the rook was under attack. I couldn't allow this counterplay. So instead, I opted for bishop c5. the rest is history, but I started to see a pattern of checkmate here. If I could tell you, that would be great, but see if you can find it for yourself. What's a checkmating pattern? A checkmating pattern is when you use a piece or two or a few to get checkmate. If I could get my knight to g4 and my queen to h2, which seems very possible and unlikely, it could lead to checkmate. It would certainly be a menacing position. So you defend it with knight to f1. Now, of course, the move is this. Just like in Morphy's style, in the opera game, you sacrifice to keep the pin and bring your other piece in the game. But before that, you take advantage of this pin, which is a crazy move. But it works. There's nothing he can do with queen takes f4. Now, I was ready to sacrifice with rook takes bishop, knight takes rook, and now knight to g4. And see, that checkmate pattern is already starting to reveal itself, and it's actually going to lead to checkmate. At the time, though, I was only focused on this. He can't take with the queen because of bishop takes e3 and queen takes g4. And otherwise, he's lost. So he played that, but like I said, he's lost. So that's the game. I like this game because it was full of tactics. And it was my first time playing the Berlin defense. I feel great playing the Berlin defense, and I look forward to playing some more games with it. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to like the video and give it a thumbs up. And I'll see you in the next one, and feel free to subscribe as well.